Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F podcast, Faith and Family First. I'm your host, Eva and Jim, and I'm here with Jim Hochberg, and today we are going to tackle the Constitution. Let's chat about that. So on this episode, Mr. Jim Hochberg, welcome to the show.
Happy President's Day.
Happy President's Day. You look very presidential today. Give me your best presidential look. Go ahead. For that camera right there, Jim.
I don't have a presidential. I've never been the president.
No, but pretend you were. Oh, come on. Anybody can be president.
That's true. I could be Joe Biden.
Oh, stop. Oh, we might have to strike that. That is canceled. All right. So actually what we're going to talk about today, I thought might be kind of fun, is Jim and I are going to do something a little different because we are going to talk about the statues that need to be tumbling down. So we're going to go through some of the cancel culture that we've seen play out across the nation. And it actually started right after the George Floyd riots. There was a lot of...
Actually, no. I got to stop you right there.
Well, no.
It started
correct me
when
after
I was a kid because we used to have Lincoln's birthday and Washington's
canceled.
birthday as separate holidays. And they combined them together, canceling both of their individual birthdays into President's Day.
Well, you're talking about when things happened in the past in a way that was somebody bringing their angst and their distrust in the government, or even celebrating something that the government did back in those days. I'm talking about after the George Floyd situation where people were angry, and all of a sudden, every Confederate statue in the nation was suddenly suspect.
It wasn't
but
sudden.
not
it was
just
slow. It took weeks.
Yes, and of course, it all ended up on our door when a certain congressional leader wanted to take down Father Damien's statue from our state capital, or our nation's capital, I should say. And that didn't go over very well with the people of Hawaii. So, yes, and so for those of you watching, Father Damien canceled. Okay, anyway, so let's talk about this. Let's talk
Are
about
you going to keep doing that
I am.
all through this show?
All through the show. Jim Hochberg.
I thought it was a onesie.
Cancel.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
No, we have to do that. And why am I hitting the Constitution?
Well, because free speech is
That's
framed
exactly
there.
right. So there's a reason behind my madness.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. So let's talk about some of these statues that have come tumbling down.
Well, before we talk about individual statues, let's talk about what is actually politically going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
And I want us to think in terms of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, because that's what this is all about. People need to realize.
You've been quoting this
It's
gentleman
something that
for a
I'm
while.
going to use a lot because it's being used against me a lot.
Ah, okay.
And I need to recognize when I see it happening so that I know how to respond. And I hope everybody else does too. So Saul Alinsky has a whole bunch of 13, actually, list of 13 rules for radicals. It's very radical to tear down statues. And amazingly, this is what went through the process politically that allowed it to be physically removal of statues. Rule number 5, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It's irrational. It's infuriating. It also works as a key pressure point to force the enemy into concessions. Ridicule. They've ridiculed the historical people behind these statutes. And what's totally unfair about it, in my thinking, is the people that want to take these statues down are evaluating these historical figures under social rules that didn't apply when these people were living people. And it's completely unfair.
Yeah, I know that, like, we've had this discussions internally with some of our groups of people. It's like when you're tearing down a statue because somebody was a slave owner, as horrible as that was for them to own slaves. And I don't know anybody who would celebrate the fact that they were a slave owner. But at the same time, back at the time that they existed, that was how people lived. I mean, there were people who owned slaves as hard. People in your family, Jim, you are a white man. I am sure somewhere in your history you probably had some slave owners.
My family came to the United States in 1902 after the Civil War. They were from Ireland and they were from Germany, Europe. And
Jim is part German. Canceled.
They had no slaves in the United States of America.
You're part German. You're canceled.
No.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry.
And if we wanted to get very technical on that, they came from Germany geographically, but I actually am half Irish, a quarter Russian, and a quarter Latvian.
Okay. Well, that's good that you do not fall into, but how do we know this? You look like a white guy to me.
I am a white guy.
Yeah. And so
there's a lot of white people that never owned slaves.
Yeah, but when we're talking about statues coming down right now with a lot of anger, there is towards the white man.
But the thing, that's what bothers me. Why? Like there's this other whole way, we're getting way off topic, but reparations for slavery. There's not, I don't think any longer a single person alive that suffered under slavery. I don't think. There could be like a super old guy. But if my family, because my mom's parents and my dad's parents came to the United States in the early 1900s, they never had slaves. Why is it my problem?
Well, I do think that there is something to be said, and we will get back to the subject of these statues. And the reason we're talking about this is because some of these statues are being taken down for this reason. But in my own family, I have one side of my family that our history is from Spain and Portugal and Africa.
Oh, see, you obviously had slaves. Your family probably drove the slave ships.
You missed the third one, also from Africa. I mean, so I've got some of that in my history.
Well, don't put your
and on my mom's side,
yes,
right? We've got the English and we've got the Irish, which a lot of people do. But in my own history, I'm going to be honest about this, right? I'm going to be fully transparent. In my mom's side of the family, we had slave owners, but we also had people that worked in the Underground Railroad, which I think is the coolest thing ever. So yes, I want to acknowledge history. That I'm acknowledging history, that I've got some bad people in my history, but I've got some good people in my history too. And I don't want to erase the good people because of the nastiness of the bad people. And I would wager a lot of viewers have good and bad in their own history.
So I want to make you think about something.
You're going to make me think about something? Okay.
So in the 1700s, Tom and George and James, the founding fathers, were born, and they lived in a culture at that time, and they did the things that they did, which ended up in them we have statues of them because we honor not the bad things about them, we honor the good things about them, right? Okay, put yourself 300 years in the future because we're going to last more than 12 years, guaranteed. But climate change is going to prove that eating meat was a terrible thing to do. And they're going to tear down statues, Colonel Sanders, Chick-fil-A, all the meat eaters are going to be the slave owners
in 300 Chick-fil-A
years. In 300 years. So that's why I'm saying it's not fair. It's not intellectually honest. It is manipulative. Saul Alinsky rules for radicals to judge a person born and who lived in the 1700s by the standards of 2021 and 2022.
And that's a really good point. And the other point that we need to make in all of this is, as Christians, we believe that there is forgiveness and
Absolutely.
There is salvation. In fact, we know a lot of good people in the Christian community that come from a really nasty background.
Which makes them very bad political candidates.
It makes them very bad political candidates.
They're great people now.
And their testimonies are
Yes.
fabulous. But you've got people that have photo albums, right? I mean, somebody somewhere has a picture of Jeffrey Dahmer, sitting in their family picture.
I have a picture of me at 9 years old at the University of Southern California track. I got my picture taken with O.J. Simpson.
See, O.J. Simpson canceled. All right.
But let's look at the list of statues that were toppled across the country because it is President's Day. We're celebrating our presidents, but we're finding out that we can't celebrate
Some.
all the presidents.
Some of them.
Now, George
there's
Washington,
some good presidents that will not be canceled.
when I was a kid, I always thought the bad thing about George Washington was he had wooden teeth, right? Isn't that what we,
That's
yeah.
what people talk about.
And I always thought, that's weird. I was a kid. So I always thought there was something wrong with George Washington. I didn't realize that wooden teeth was a good enough reason to knock your statue. Abraham Lincoln's statue was removed. Abraham Lincoln. So if it's related to George Floyd and the treatment of African Americans, which would relate in Lincoln's time to slavery, he freed the slaves. What are they tearing down his statue for? You know what it is? Because he stood for the proposition in the middle of the 1800s that slaves should be freed, but that maybe it would be better to give them their own country somewhere. So I can see people don't think that's a great idea. I get it. But if you put yourself, if you do Back to the Future, you get in that DeLorean, you go to the scene when they were in the cowboy days, that's what they're talking about. Way back then, he thought maybe they should be given Liberia, which was a country in Africa. That's why his statue got taken down. Do you know why Teddy Theodore Roosevelt's statue got taken down?
No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Well, it's not so much Teddy Roosevelt, but it's the sculpture that the artist presented Teddy Roosevelt in. They took the statue away because they didn't like the context of the sculpture's artistic view. So it wasn't anything that he did in particular, but it's Saul Alinsky. Okay, I got another Saul Alinsky for you. This is also, if you hear these words and you put it in the context of removal of statues, okay? Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy. Go after people, not institutions. People hurt faster than institutions.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
It is very interesting. So on this little Constitution of the United States booklet that you have, which president is on the front of it?
That looks like Mr. Jefferson to me, but it's upside down.
Canceled.
Who is it?
It's Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
okay.
You can't have Thomas Jefferson on something.
Well, I'm not that old. Oh, it's George Washington.
Is it?
I think that's George Washington. It was upside down.
No, that is not. It's Thomas. No, it is. It is. It's George Washington. Okay, no. Okay, I stand corrected. George Washington canceled. Sorry. All right. I'll stop. I'll stop picking on the presidents.
I want to bring us up to date.
Okay.
So remember.
Wait, when you're saying up to date, how much up to date?
The Biden administration. Because remember, all of these statues were being torn down during the Trump administration.
Right.
And remember, he passed executive order. He issued an executive order that made it a big crime to take down statues. In fact, he issued an order June 2020 instructing the federal government to, quote, prosecute to the fullest extent any person that destroys, damages, vandalizes, or desecrates a monument, memorial, or statue. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm, I do.
Well, guess what President Biden did? He revoked that. Can you believe that? He revoked that presidential proclamation. So he decided for some dumb reason that we're not going to prosecute people that destroy property.
Well, it's
pretty crazy.
It is crazy. And we're going to put a link below from thehill.com that actually did a list of all the statues.
By the way, you probably didn't know about it because do you know where I had to go? I had to go to the BBC to find this. The Biden revocation of the executive order to prosecute statue breakers.
Well, but you did the right thing by making sure you could find it. Right. I mean, you research it, and a lot of people don't go that far. And I think that's why we're where we're at today is that people don't take the time to go and find these things. But there's a list of statues across the United States right now that are coming down, and they're coming down for all kinds of reasons. And, I want to make it clear that there's a lot of this nastiness that I wouldn't promote. I wouldn't be out there sign waving for some of these people if they were running for office today. But on the other hand, I understand that you can't fix the future if you don't deal with the past. You cannot ignore what happened in the past. You can't rewrite it so that you can make it look rosy. We have to know the evil that we've done in order to get to a state of grace. And that's so for me, you don't want to have the statue of this person up in a prominent place anymore. Okay, that's a discussion that can happen. But to try and erase history is something that bothers me to my core.
Well, it's actually, for me, even a step worse, because it's ignoring the fact that this country, unlike, as far as I know, any other country in history, we self-correct as we go along. And by self-correct, what I mean is we give women the right to vote. We get rid of slavery. We protect religious liberty. We aren't stuck in an aristocracy form of government. We are self-governing people. So as our self-governing civilization matures, we are willing through the process, because it's not tied to an individual. It's not King George or nobody. It's this always ever-changing people that sit in government seats that we elect that make the rules. It is very uncivilized to vandalize, tear down, and burn because you don't like something.
Yeah. I think that what's happened is some of these people, like the situation that's going on with Neil Young right now, right? And that fight with Joe Rogan. I have to laugh because I'm old enough to remember Neil Young.
Yeah, he's a terrible singer.
Stop.
His
I
voice,
like him.
His voice ruined Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Okay, I like Neil Young.
They were really good before he
had some good stuff. But let's remember back when he was in his heyday, that he stood up to the man. He stood up to the government.
Well, that's what they all did. That was the whole
thing about that time. So you can't suddenly now go back and say, follow the leader. Because back then, when he was younger, he said, don't follow the leader. Be your own person. Stand up for what you believe. And I agree with you that there's a limit to what we should be allowed to do, as far as, like, I used to be happy with the law that you could not burn the American flag. But I'm from an older generation. The younger generation thinks it's okay. It's my way to show protest against this country. But I know that, again, acknowledging that I've got some bad people in my family history, I got a lot of good people in my family history that fought for and died for this country in several wars. And that flag to them was a symbol of hope. Mm-hmm. That flag to them was a symbol of victory, and it was a symbol of unity. I mean, do you remember the early days? Well, depending on what age you are, people might not see it as the early days, but weren't you proud to be an American when somebody won the gold medal in the Olympics back in the day?
So first 10 years of my life, I lived on military bases all over the world. If I was riding my bicycle at 5 p.m., I would hear taps being played, and I would be required to get off of my bicycle, stand on the sidewalk with my hand on my heart, while the whole flag coming down thing. Yeah.
You see it now. In fact, you're at a game, right? And they'll play the national
People
anthem.
Are picking their nose. Yeah. They don't care.
You see all of the older people are there. They're like, they're deep, in pride. And you see the older one, they're like checking their phones.
Yeah.
In fact, they're taking selfies, oh, look at my ridiculous grandpa, with his hand over his heart. But I guess what I'm saying is that, when we're coming to the point of toppling statues, and when we're coming to the point of burning flags, you and I, we've long supported somebody's right to protest.
Absolutely.
And we do believe that people should be allowed to protest. You don't like what the government's doing, you should be allowed to protest. But where have we lost respect?
Saul Alinsky. I'm telling you, you've got to read Saul Alinsky. I'm going to read you a couple of more of these. And they're very clever. Some of them are kind of wonky things, but number 4, make the enemy. Saul Alinsky considers people that think politically differently than him enemy. Make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. If the rule is that every letter gets a reply, send 30,000 letters. You can kill them. you can kill them with this because no one can possibly obey all their own rules. These guys think so much harder about political victory than we do. Have you ever sat down and thought to yourself, how can I make the legislature in Hawaii more the way I like it? I am going to make them live by their own rules. Well, recently in the news, two of our one House member and one senator are being prosecuted for taking bribes to do legislation. So if the newspaper covers it the way hopefully they should, we can take this point number 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. But we don't do that. We don't work this hard.
No, but Jim and I are going to be doing a show as we move closer to the elections on what to look for in a candidate. It's not going to be whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. No. It's going to be looking. And one of the things the scriptures tells us is select from among yourselves
people that hate bribes.
So they have to watch the show. They have to watch the show to see how we connect those dots.
But there's a certain pastor that said it many times.
Yes, and that's okay. That's okay because we're gonna help you sift through all of that as you're looking through the list. But when you were looking down this list, by the way,
yes,
was any of these statues was there any that were surprising to you that you said, I cannot believe that they would have taken down this statue?
Jefferson, Washington, the presidents. I mean, it's Lincoln. It's bizarre. But one thing that isn't in any of the discussion about why after the Civil War was it okay to put up statues of the Confederate generals and that kind of stuff. And when I was reading this, the thought occurred to me, yeah, how come? Because if you are living in Ukraine right now, and if Russia takes over Ukraine, Russia's going to put up Russian statues. The Ukrainians aren't going to get to put up their Confederates, we'll call them, right? So why did that happen here? It is so interesting. Lincoln wanted to bring the country back together. He was a real unifier after a hot war, unlike Biden, who's just tearing everything up. And so it's quite possible that they were allowed to, in fact, they weren't imprisoned, which is historically when you lose a war, your soldiers are slaves and all that kind of stuff,
Bad
right?
things happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he let them go back to their farms. I think he let them keep one gun or something. But I mean, it was a very unusual way to end a war. And maybe they were allowed to keep their pride in their history and their families by putting up these statues. So it may have been that at that time, it served a really healing purpose.
Well, when we're talking about this idea of tearing down statues, like let's go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, Father Damien. Trying to take his statue down.
They don't even know anything about him.
Father Damien, there was nothing about the life that he lived that would have.
He was a Catholic. They don't like that.
Well, but even that is not why they're like when you look at the reason they're tearing down most of these statues was because of how these people were looked at through the eyes of civil rights
in modern era.
Yeah, in modern era. But Father Damien went above and beyond in so many different. It made no sense. In fact, that particular congresswoman, who shall remain unnamed, who made such a big deal about it, it was obvious that she knew absolutely nothing about the history of Father Damien, what he did for these islands. So I think that, again, going back to the history part of why a statue goes up, there's always a history. And sometimes they do put up something bad to remind you of what happened. And now
I got a really good closing point too.
Right. Before you make that closing point, though, when I was looking through the list, I want to answer my own question about what I found the most interesting. I didn't find none of them jumped off the page to me. But what was interesting to me, and maybe this will tie into your last thought, is that there's a difference between the statues that were torn down in an act of vandalism and some that were done by official
the government.
means.
Yep. So nope, that's true. So February 7th, 2022, very, very, very recently, it was in the news that, if you don't know, Clarence Thomas, who's the senior guy on the Supreme Court when Breyer leaves, is from Georgia. And if you saw his documentary, he was a really poor kid. Did you see that documentary?
I did.
It's amazing that he went from being the poorest of poor, raised by his grandparents, to get to go to Catholic school and get educated and become a lawyer and become a judge and the EEOC and then on the Supreme Court. So in Georgia, the Senate voted 32-21 to allow the erection of a monument to Clarence Thomas. A number of Democrats harshly criticized the plan. Now, the reason I like this is it kind of goes to they are revealing the politics as opposed to the hidden politics in the George Floyd thing. So, Atlanta Democrat Senator Nan Orrock spoke about tearing down the monument if Thomas were hypothetically to become a shameful figure. And they quoted her as saying, "You put a statue up to him, you don't want to be pulling it down later if things go badly, if the person goes astray," which is kind of interesting. You would never put up a statue to anybody because you never know, right? I mean, if that was the standard, you wouldn't even want your own kids to have your last name. They might do something stupid in the news. Another person, Senator Nikki Merritt, went much further, attacking him as a traitor to Black Americans and citing the thoroughly debunked sexual harassment charge that Democrats deployed to stop his nomination, which he called a high-tech lynching. And then Democrat Senator Emanuel Jones says, "We're not here talking about Justice Thomas as the man. We all have a great deal of respect for his many accomplishments. It's his policies, it's his rulings, it's his decisions we find extremely offensive." Pretty interesting. And then the last thing I wanted to share is that Representative Donna McLeod, also a Democrat, wrote a column about it where she said, "I'd rather them keep a Confederate monument than a statue of Clarence Thomas. That's how much I don't like the idea." So we're talking about tearing down statues. They're talking about not letting one go up to the sole Black man on the United States Supreme Court right now, who has been the bane of the Democrats because he believes the Constitution is not a living, breathing document. It doesn't change unless it's amended as set forth in the language.
And we on this show believe that all men are created equal and endowed with
by their creator,
by
that guy,
That's
that
right.
thing, the thing.
That's right. And so although we make all kinds of jokes today, or I made all kinds of jokes about canceling people, we stand on the sword of truth. And that's the one thing that we're always going to do here on this show. We're going to stand on what the Bible says. And in that case, instead of knocking down the Constitution, we're going to provide support. And if you want one of these, send me an email at info@hawaiifamilyforum.org and I'll get you one. But in the meantime, share this video, and make sure that you comment. And if we're not canceled, we'll see you next week.
Happy President's Day.
Mahalo, everybody.